Welcome to PLN 30, where today we're talking about flexible playlists. Playlists are a part of one of the blended learning models called individual rotation. And remember that blended learning combines the best of in-person classroom teaching with online instruction, where our students have some control over when, where, or how they learn. And then also we're using data and technology to personalize that instruction. So let's take a look at our face-to-face and VLA support website. Under Phase 2, we're introducing blended learning. And earlier this week, you learned about flipped learning and station rotations. But today, like I said, we're talking about flexible playlists. So let's talk about why we would use a playlist. First, students are able to choose how and when they learn. Their pathways can be differentiated or personalized. It will help create clarity about their trajectory of work that they're doing, what students are working towards. In a playlist, you might be able to mix different media and learning modalities that can be directed towards different interests that students may have. But I think most importantly, students are able to receive more one-on-one feedback from the teacher and support because these activities are done asynchronously. So the one-pager on this site has everything that you need to know about flexible playlists. So let's start looking at this graphic. I think what's important to note is that we're always going to start whole group or have some kind of hook or maybe a pre-assessment or check for understanding just so that we know where students stand with our concept. So if you have kids who are virtual, you're going to have to make that choice if you need them to join you for that hook or if that's something that you can provide to them asynchronously. It's up to you if you need the whole class to meet together at the same time. For the actual playlist itself, these are just some suggestions on the activities that you might include in a playlist, but it's important to note that it's not just all individual activities. There should be time built in for peer-to-peer interactions and for small groups. Of course, you'll have that independent work time, and then we definitely want to make sure that students are creating something, right? That would be the performance task that they're going to complete that shows mastery of the understanding of the learning objective. Once students work their way through the playlist, you'll always have them reflect on how they did. You will have them assess themselves. Ultimately, we want to teach them how they can track their own progress. So maybe that can free up the teacher to support students in other ways. And then we'll also end with some kind of an assessment or an additional check for understanding. On the second of this one-pager, we walk through a whole example. So it talks about how you might have that synchronous whole group session that's no more than 10-15 minutes. We talk about the options that you can include on a playlist and what that check for understanding or final assessment piece may be. But check out this one-pager because we do have examples of playlists from varying levels just to give you an idea of what they might look like in action. So how can you start small? You're not expected to be an expert at implementing flexible playlists anytime soon. So what we've done on this website in phases, starting with phase 2, is we've made a list of some things that you can try with your students to see what works and what doesn't work. So for a playlist, you can start by creating just a list of must-do activities for students to complete asynchronously. And it's okay to go ahead and give that a timetable. Later on, we might work towards them working at their own pace, but it's okay to start where you're just having them work asynchronously on a timetable. And this is good for your face-to-face students and your virtual students. So you can have all of the activities be the same for those students, but you have to think logistically what that will look like whenever you're trying to support them and whenever those activities might be collaborative in nature. If you're past that, then you might want to start at the advanced level. Start introducing some small ways where you can include students' choice in activities, where you can cater to some of their interests. that they might be excited about. So to get you started, this file right here will link to a forced copy where you can build in your activities. I think this particular one has space for 20 activities, pretty lengthy, but you can see that after 5 activities, there's always some kind of checkpoint. So while you're assessing and giving feedback to students during activity 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, there might be, this checkpoint could actually be what students do at the end of your lesson or your time with them for that day. Additionally, here is access to a folder that has some playlists that are already completed for you, so you can see what they might look like in a math classroom or a science classroom or social studies, English, whatever it may be. I really like this electrical currents one. This playlist is courtesy of Susanna Serber over at Motley Elementary. This is what she uses to teach her science in 4th grade. So she always starts with this YouTube video where she actually will walk students through the playlist so they have an understanding of what they need to do to complete all of the items.
So today we're going to start learning about current electricity. So this is going to be the playlist you're going to do for this whole week. So we're going to start right here. So start here, and you're looking at the video that I'm making right here. And second thing you have to do is read about what you are going to learn to do this week. So you're going to learn about the difference between conductors and insulators.
You can see how she is using curriculum resources and videos and Pear Deck to embed in her playlist. So while students are working, she is able to give that real-time feedback, so she knows exactly how kids are doing, where they're struggling, what questions that they may have. That's the beauty of a playlist. So she also might be able to conference one-on-one with students or even pull small groups based on that data coming in. So that's where the word flexible comes into play in terms of playlists. When you're ready to get started with playlists, what I really recommend doing is having a conversation with your PLC about getting started. So these are some questions that I really want you to think about and consider whenever you're starting for the first time using playlists in your instruction. How are you going to launch the lesson for all of your kids? Will it be the same for everybody? How are students going to access each item in the playlist? Do you need to post links in your Seesaw or in your Google Classroom? Or are you okay with having everything linked off of a HyperDoc or off of a Google slide? How are you going to give real-time feedback to students while they are working? Are you using a tool like ClassKick or Pear Deck where you can see that data coming in? Or have you taught students to check for those private messages or comments in your LMS? How much time are you going to take? For the science example, she said that that was a playlist for a whole week. But how might you use a playlist for a class period, for a 50 or 90-minute lesson? And then most importantly, we always have to ask, how are we going to know if students master the TEKS? So that is what you can try now. When phase 3 rolls out at the end of this week, it's also going to give you some beginner and advanced options for you to try. So for this gradual release, I want you to figure out how you can introduce more student choice. Not everything on your playlist might be a must-do item. Maybe it depends on the student level of understanding or the ownership that they have to want to do more than is actually expected of them. So on this page we have another example. This is actually a secondary ELA example of what that playlist might look like. And what I really like about this one is you can see in the example how the teacher is actually adjusting the playlist in real time for students once they're seeing their level of understanding coming in. So if I see that a student is struggling with one of their activities, I might come in and adjust their playlist to provide more support for that student, either through text, video, or other resources. So for this week, I want you to Think about how students might be able to choose what activities they're going to complete. Maybe they choose the order. If the order isn't necessarily important to you, then give them small choices like being able to complete it in the order that they would like. And also think about how you can be creative with pacing. I think that's a little bit easier for our VLA students who might be working at home, but what about for our students who are face-to-face? How might we give them more control over their pace inside of the classroom? Something that you can do to amp up the rigor in your flexible playlist are thinking about how you could pair your online and offline students, right? Think about what we've learned in the student partners sections of this website and what content or what digital tools will support that. How might you be able to give real-time feedback to students? That's extremely important so they know where they're at, where they stand with you and with the learning objectives. What are you doing to adjust those student playlists? So if something isn't working for them, don't keep them on that same path. It's definitely okay to change or to pivot what they need to do if something isn't working. And then always, how are students going to master that TEK? For this last phase, we really want you to think about how students might begin to set goals in terms of their learning objectives. How can we teach them to reach those goals and to track their progress to those goals? A way that you can do this is you're going to make a base playlist template for most of your class, but make additional copies so that you can tweak those for the different levels of learners that you may have in your classroom. And then this week, introduce goal setting for their students. So what might goal setting look like whenever you are working with students and they're working on their playlist? Take this example about the progressive era in U.S. history. If they're supposed to learn about this era, take some notes, build vocabulary, analyze some primary source documents, and then create this poster, a goal for a student who's really understanding this era might be to compare and contrast different movements from the past to the present. How do they relate? A student might not be able to come up with that goal on their own, but as the teacher, you could provide sample goals for students to choose from, and then what they could do is track their progress towards those goals. Here's an assessment template that would help students track their level of learning. So you can put your learning objectives over here on the left, or maybe you even put your activities that are in the playlist here, and you can take these targets and you can put them next to or inside the box where students are assessing their level of understanding. If you aren't ready for students to do that, then students can have their own copy of this and teachers can do that for you. And then you can even leave them notes or information on the side that help you give that feedback real time to students. So if you are ready to rock and roll with flexible playlists in your classroom, then here are some last questions to consider. How are you going to teach students to set relevant goals for the objective or the learning target? How are they going to track that process, assess their own learning needs? Remember, we want students to take agency and ownership over their learning, so this is a great way to do that. What pathways can you create for students to let you know when it's time for a personal check-in or a conference? Some of those templates actually have those check-ins built in, but what if students were actually reaching out to you whenever they were ready to show or present their progress to you instead of just turning it in and waiting for you to respond to them? And then most importantly, make sure students are mastering the TEKS. With blended learning, with some of these models, it seems like we're giving them a lot of freedom and a lot of room to have choice and to take off and go. And that can be scary because maybe they haven't done that before or you haven't done that before. But if you are formatively assessing and you're giving feedback and you're checking in and seeing how students are progressing, then we know that meaningful learning is taking place. So be on the lookout for phases 3 and 4 of the face-to-face and VLA support website to drop in the next coming weeks. And if you would like to implement flexible playlists in your classroom, reach out to your campus instructional technology coach.